Welcome back to another episode of Christian Natural Health. Today, I am very pleased to have Dr. William West with us, a Harvard and Johns Hopkins-trained oncologist and researcher. He's advanced cancer care and research for over 3 decades. As a Christian and lifelong member of one of the largest Methodist churches in the U.S., he's lectured for more than 40 years on the myth of science and faith being at odds, believing they support one another and that science reveals God. His first book, Sacred Science: Understanding Divine Creation, is already just released this week from Post Hill Press. Welcome, Dr. Bill. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. So the book was fascinating. I just finished reading it yesterday. And so just for, to kind of state up front, I'm a young earth creationist, but there's a lot that we agree on apparently through the book, even though I gather from what you wrote that you would be classified as maybe like an old earth God-directed evolutionist, if that's a category. I don't know.
I'm not sure I love those categories.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
I'm first a Jesus person.
Amen.
Uh, I'm a
Yes.
Christian,
Right.
and I'm unbelievably impressed with the tools God used to create the universe and the
Mhm.
world and life.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
so I'm sure we have a lot in common.
We definitely do. So, what inspired you, first of all? I mean, you've been lecturing on this for 40 years, but what inspired you to finally put it in a book?
I think it was an article in the Wall Street Journal that talked about the rising proportion of nuns, not Catholics,
Hmm.
but NONES.
Hmm.
It's up almost 40%, particularly in young people, saying, what is their religious affiliation? And their
Uh,
answer is none.
right,
And
right.
if you dig a little deeper, why? Because they believe science is a better platform.
Um,
So I'm going to blow this whole interview by giving you my conclusion.
please.
Science is a revelation of God. So,
Amen.
and it's
Absolutely.
tempting to escape the God of the Scripture. They've just gone to another revelation of the same
Yeah,
God.
yeah, absolutely. So fantastic. And so just out of curiosity, because you're retired now, right?
Well,
So,
actually, yes, I don't practice. I don't see patients actively.
right. Okay.
I'm a cancer doctor,
Right.
but I'm very actively involved right now in bringing a wonderful new immunotherapy to
Okay.
Memphis
Uh-huh.
with my son-in-law. It's a lot of fun.
Oh, that's
If we have
fantastic.
time later, we can talk about it. But
Sure.
I always thought the immune system would be one of the major answers to cancer, and it's turning out that that is true. So,
Oh, fascinating. Yeah, that's terrific. So, just out of curiosity, what percentage would you say of your colleagues, just all throughout the years, have been either atheist or agnostic because of what they were taught about evolution?
well, gosh, didn't Darwin do us a lot of harm? I mean,
Yeah.
bless his heart. Uh, I'll just give you this figure: 60% of scientists are believers. Now, the problem is we have this ethic around the field not to talk about it. Don't give,
60%. Hold on. 60% of scientists are believers. Is that what you just said?
yes,
Like Christians.
yes, but they're scared to talk about it. They won't because the
Wow.
mantra of the field is don't give God a foot in the door. Now, that's not as mean and evil as it sounds. The purpose of that is to say, keep going after the science, keep trying to understand the science better. Don't use God as an excuse to stop.
Uh-huh.
So
Sure.
that's been true, for a long, long time.
Right, right. Oh my gosh, that's a revelation. That's really cool. And I wonder, to what degree is that because everybody sees what's really obvious if you start actually looking into it? There's
You're quoting Paul now from Romans.
yeah, yeah. It's just, how can you not look and see? And I've just kind of assumed that the majority of scientists were atheists because that's what they're taught, but that it was spiritual blindness, that they just weren't putting two and two together. But 60%, that's amazing.
Yeah, no, they're just in a culture that says don't talk about it. You know,
Okay, so and you structured your book with this idea of blueprints that God
yes,
kind of programmed into the universe. Can you give
yes.
a brief overview for our listeners of, like, why did you use that and what does that mean in
Well,
terms of
the reality, it's mathematics. God is the most amazing mathematician.
yeah.
But if I told you equations, first of all, space-time takes over 20 equations to describe.
Mm.
So it was easier just to talk about space-time as a blueprint.
Sure.
But
Okay.
it's sort of shorthand. What
Uh-huh.
were the tools that God used to bring this universe into existence?
Yeah.
And I outlined 8 in the first third of the book. The book is 3 sections:
Mhm.
the universe, life, and created in his image, mind.
Yeah.
And so those 8 blueprints if you look at each one of them, that was really fun and a thrill to do. They're all super intelligent,
Yeah.
obvious,
Yeah.
and then to see them work in concert together to build out this universe.
Right.
So it makes me sad to think the young people are going to this science and they're not really understanding it and
Yeah.
not seeing it for what it is.
Right. Yeah. So, let's dig into that a little bit more. I think it's really fascinating that you're saying that math is reflective of God. Can you explain that concept a little bit more?
Everything in this universe is mathematical. You
Yeah.
and I are. Our DNA is.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's been known for a long, long time.
Sure.
And the great all right, I'm going to tell you my favorite story real quick. One
Please.
of my favorite blueprints is the Higgs field.
I was
Have
going
you?
to ask you about it anyway, so
Okay, good, good.
fantastic.
Well, the universe is created. There's an enormous amount of light. The light collides and begins to create the components of the atom.
Yeah.
They need mass. They need physicality. Otherwise we'll be in this big light show, and we
Right.
wouldn't have
Yeah.
Earth, wouldn't
Right.
have us.
Uh-huh.
And so God filled the universe with this mass encoding field. So these would-be wannabe atom particles of the atom have to maneuver their way through this Higgs field. And in that process, they're encoded with physicality. They
Mhm.
are made physical. And the really wonderful thing about that Higgs field, how was it discovered?
Mhm.
Peter Higgs looks at an equation. He reads an equation. He goes,
This
if,
has to
if,
be here.
if this field existed, it would explain this mystery of the missing mass.
Wow.
That was in 1964. It was
Uh-huh.
confirmed in 2012 at the CERN accelerator in Europe.
Uh-huh.
Uh, Yet Higgs bosons fill this field, and then the components of the atom that make this world physical have to navigate their way through that field, and
Mhm.
they're encoded with a perfect quantity of mass.
Mhm.
So, and just the fact, so then the question becomes, uh, where does that equation spend eternity?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And then you go to the higher dimension where God has libraries,
Right.
libraries of math, libraries for life, libraries of gene and protein sequences, and
Yeah.
where his planet unfolds as he designs.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that concept that, I mean, even aside from two people taking evidence, I suppose, from a scientific study and maybe interpreting it through different worldview lenses. And so a Darwinian evolutionist and a creationist or somewhere in between can come up with different conclusions depending on the filter that they use. But you can't argue with math. You can't argue with you can't argue with the laws of logic. Somebody had to put them there. And it seems so obvious. Everybody, no matter what your worldview is, if you want to have a conversation at all, you have to agree on some of these foundations. Otherwise, it's a completely useless discussion. You're not even playing by the same rules. So,
There are books written
Mhm.
comparing mathematics to the qualities of God.
Really?
Always true,
Uh-huh.
eternal,
Uh,
and
yeah,
several others. But
right,
no, he is the mathematician,
right.
and so he creates a mathematics. But then the wondrous thing is he converts these equations, and that's the mystery. And it
Uh-huh.
actually was asked by Stephen Hawking, who's an awful atheist,
Right.
how did he breathe fire into the equations? How did he make them happen? It's one thing to have the mathematics. It's another thing to say, okay, go be a Higgs field, fill my
Sure.
universe. So
Yeah.
those are the great mysteries of how
Oh.
God activated his
Mhm.
equations.
And so let's get just slightly nerdy. So, with respect to, you said that the Higgs bosons encodes the perfect amount of mass. Can you talk about what do you mean by perfect in that regard?
Well, you have to have a just right ratio, for instance, of the electron to the proton to
Hmm.
have an atom.
Yeah.
I forget the ratio. It's 4,000, 1 to 4,000, a little bitty electron, bigger proton.
Yeah.
Uh, and those have to be perfectly well set to create a stable atom.
Mhm.
They can't they're not arbitrary.
Right.
So uh, God set up a system whereby through his blueprints, he and his mathematical power, he made perfect atoms. Not and now we're going to get into the fact I'm a cancer doctor,
Yeah.
et cetera. So perfection does not always mean eternity on this earth. That's not what he planned.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So, you talk about from the beginning, you kind of trace it through the Big Bang. So I know there's some debate about, did the Big Bang happen? Was that when God said, let there be light? Was that the Big Bang kind of a thing? So first of all, before we get into, how that aligns with Genesis 1, what evidence is there that a Big Bang happened?
Well, there's a lot of evidence, frankly, and the most important right now is the expanding universe.
Hmm.
I think it was a Catholic priest who went to Einstein,
Hmm.
and I always block this. This Catholic priest should be credited over Einstein. He went to Einstein and said, "Professor, why did you put this constant, this cosmological constant, in
Yeah.
your equations?
Uh-huh.
Because you wanted a stable Earth. Einstein didn't want the Earth to be expanding. He wanted the universe. He wanted it to be stable." And Lemaitre, yeah, I remembered, a Catholic priest from Belgium goes to him and they have a confrontation. And Einstein goes, "Well, your math is correct, but your physics is abominable." But, but
Uh-huh.
then this fellow called Hubble out on the West Coast says, "Wait a minute, the further away a galaxy is, the faster it's moving away from us.
Hmm.
So we live in an expanding universe. It's still expanding,
All right.
which meant you can rewind that movie.
Mhm.
It's expanding, rewind it back, and you get to an incredible beginning."
Right. Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah,
so, how does that concept of the Big Bang? So, in Genesis 1, we're told day one is light, day two, atmosphere and water separate, day three is earth and plants, day four, sun, moon, and stars. But my understanding of the idea behind the Big Bang is the stars are the source of all of the elements that then become the planets, right?
that's right. Right.
So, how does that sequence line up? How does that interpretation jive?
Well, I hope I don't offend people with this statement, but I don't ask the Bible to be a scientific textbook
Okay.
written 600 years before Christ.
Hmm.
I think it's pretty amazing that they got the idea there was a beginning,
Hmm.
and it involved an awful lot of light.
Hmm.
And then, if you recall, the sun wasn't hung until day four in the
Hmm.
6 days of Genesis. So
Right.
they're talking about a different light.
Hmm.
And I, when a new believer, a disbeliever comes to me, I said, "Well, let's just look at the first sentence of Genesis." And then
Hmm.
the day that God hung the sun, the Egyptians are riding around worshiping the sun as God.
Right.
And the ancient Jew is there having been inspired to realize God created the universe in this incredible burst of light. And
Hmm.
that sun is just his product that he hung in the sky for
Hmm.
us on earth
Yeah.
at a later date.
Hmm. Gotcha. So it's not necessarily that you are interpreting it from a poetical standpoint per se. You just think that like we don't look at that to be too literal, essentially. It's just sort of close.
Well, you know,
Sure.
I believe in every word of it.
Sure. Okay.
Uh, but I do take the freedom to put some metaphor in
Okay.
it.
Okay.
Um, and I think that's right. You know, I mean, oh wait, now I'll offend you and say, was there a talking snake? There might
Yeah.
have been. What do
Yeah.
I know? I wasn't in Eden,
So,
but
yeah.
but it also could be metaphorical.
Right.
But
And I think there's freedom in, there's believers that what ultimately matters is what we do with Jesus, right? So like
that's
whether we
right.
agree with the foundational exactly
Amen.
the sequence and all the rest of it, ultimately we have to agree on that point. That's the
You're right. You're
salient
right.
thing, absolutely. But okay, so what I found very fascinating, now I've never heard an argument before for evolution that goes back to this idea, because one of the main arguments against it, and you point this out in the book, is that there aren't really hardly any intermediates, that there's
Oh,
just all of a sudden there's an explosion of life and there's all this diversity and all the rest of it. You made a very interesting argument that the DNA, there's, okay, before I go into that, junk DNA, can you explain what that quote unquote is and what we now kind of know about it?
well, we have a sentence 3 billion letters long in
Mm.
each cell in our body,
Yeah.
and we replicate that sentence 1 trillion times a day.
Hmm.
So you're going to make your new DNA 1 trillion times today.
Hmm.
Uh, and the genome is a fascinating phenomenon
Hmm.
because it has multiple components. It has the genes that make hair and skin and bone and tissue and heart muscle.
Hmm.
Uh, it has the genes that regulate the other genes, and they are so important. They tell the other genes when to turn on and when to turn off.
Hmm.
And you can imagine a little fetus developing. That's an amazing activity. Hey, we're making a liver over here now. Wake
Hmm.
up, get active. Okay, the liver's done, stop.
Hmm. Right.
And so this orchestra that's going on in this DNA as this
Yeah.
baby is fetus is developing. And then we have a lot of DNA that's called junk. Uh, and I believe it is a nursery because
Hmm.
I think mutations visit God's library,
Hmm.
travel it. It's very well organized. God has it so that mutations have highways and byways, and
Hmm.
they can find the right gene for the future and
Hmm.
bring it back to the nursery and the genome.
Hmm.
And it looks like when, and I love a word called pre-assembly. It means when it's time for a new thing to happen, the
Hmm.
team of genes has to pre-assemble in the genome. So it's almost like an army gathering,
Hmm.
and a place to launch. And
Hmm.
that's what the genome provides. And it's been called junk.
Hmm.
Um, but that junk is the nursery, it's the organizational spot.
Hmm.
Uh, and yes, you mentioned something really important, and Darwin just got it all wrong on all four counts.
Hmm.
He thought evolution happened by taking one organism and making a minor change to it. That's
Right.
not the way it happens. Creatures just appear abruptly.
Hmm.
The echolocating bat is my favorite example. There
Hmm.
wasn't a partial echolocating bat.
Right.
There wasn't one, there wasn't a little precursor creature. That's
Right.
how Darwin would have had it. He would have had that little precursor creature have a little mutation and so forth. No, just all of a sudden, this bat flew near your head because it had echolocation. And
Hmm.
at the same time, the whale developed the ability to see in the sound, see in the dark.
Hmm.
So these things happen abruptly
Hmm.
because they've been planned and
Hmm.
they are downloaded. It's almost like client server architecture.
Hmm.
And these creatures happen.
Hmm. Hmm. So, and you also had made a couple of, you gave several examples in the book of creatures that have genes that are kind of inappropriate for their environment and it's dormant. It hasn't been turned on. Can you give us some examples of creatures like that?
Gosh, well, that's interesting. I may need to reread my book. Uh,
Okay. So, but
but
that's what I
but
thought was like your explanation for the fact that these genes were dormant and they had this pre-assembly going on because there's some examples of that where there's,
oh sure,
genes that were okay. So
yeah. Well, they were called junk, but they're
yeah,
not.
right,
But
right.
um, yeah, I think the more important point is
Hmm.
unrelated species are finding the same gene. Now
Hmm.
that would never happen under Darwin. Of course, he
Right.
didn't know what a gene was,
Sure. Well, yeah.
but under modern standard theory.
Hmm.
But let's take my favorite example is the black and white panda and the red panda. And
Right.
they are one's a ferret and one's a bear.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
they live in bamboo forests in China.
Yeah.
Somehow, miraculously, they found the same 70 genes to digest bamboo.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So, oh, lucky, wasn't it?
Right, exactly. Well, and I mean, you could also think of it as just, by metaphor. If you have a lot of times they will determine that Paul in the New Testament wrote certain books, or they think he did because he uses similar phrases. So, the authors are going to recycle the same ideas. Why would you reinvent the wheel if you already did something that works? Keep
Yes,
doing it for sure. So, so the idea you also kind of talk about the Cambrian explosion in there, and that's one of the things that even Darwin stumbled over in his day.
he did. Yes.
There was nothing for a long time, and then all of a sudden. So, my interpretation of that, from just curious what you would say, from the young Earth creation standpoint, was that the Cambrian explosion was because there was lots of fossils rapidly formed because there was a flood and they got trapped, and so that was the reason why they all showed up. From this standpoint, why were there suddenly so many in the same strata of rock all at once? Was this just like the time that God said, okay, all of these species punctuated equilibrium jumps to the next level? Okay, okay.
Well, you got to realize we're at the bottom of the deep ocean.
Right. Okay.
We're down where the primitive life sort of sat on the ocean and just absorbed through its membrane, its surface.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden we get lobsters and they're bilateral and they have claws and
Right.
they have eyes.
Right.
And the trilobite, the roly-poly, it could weigh 10 pounds.
Hmm.
These fascinating creatures show up at the bottom of these ancient oceans.
Hmm.
or in these ancient oceans.
Hmm.
And to me, my interpretation of that
Hmm.
is God has downloaded and pre-assembled the genes for these creatures.
Hmm.
And then the big question, and we're not sure then what sent those genes to the factory. It
Hmm.
may have been a rising oxygen level in
Oh,
the water.
interesting. Okay. Yeah. As opposed to God just being like, okay, it's your time. There's something
Well,
outside that triggered it.
well, like, he could have been the one that made the
Sure.
oxygen rise,
Well,
you know?
true. Yeah. So there's lots of levers to potentially pull there. Gotcha.
Exactly.
Okay, so I am curious again because interpretational differences. What evidence is there for the old Earth that causes you to want to go with evolution at all, as opposed to just, the literal interpretation of Genesis? What would you say to somebody who's on the other side of taking it literally?
I worry sometimes that I don't know the definitions of old Earth and so forth. Is that what I believe? I mean, I believe the Earth is old.
Sure. Okay.
I believe the universe is old.
Yeah.
What is time? It's nothing to God, by the way.
Okay. Yeah.
So it doesn't bother me religiously because he's not in time.
True.
Uh, so I have no problem with the sun being 5 billion years old.
Mhm.
Uh, and as a matter of fact, if the universe is 15 billion years old and the sun is 5 billion years old, well, then it showed up 2/3 of the way through creation, which
Yeah.
is the fourth of 6 days.
Sure. Yeah. Uh-huh.
So, you know,
Got
I don't have any concern with time. I just,
got it. Okay.
yeah.
So, just throwing this out there, I'm just curious, what you would think. I've heard arguments for people who are trying to preserve old creation, but also take Genesis literally, that so Genesis 1 is, the very beginning, and then Genesis 1 verse 2 rather is the earth is without form and void. So I've heard some people try to insert a gap there, the idea that there was a creation, a destruction, and then from Genesis 1 verse 2 on was a recreation, in which case have you ever heard this before? No. Oh, okay. So then I can't
Sorry,
necessarily.
I'm an
Okay, all right.
oncologist.
Sure. All right. I was just curious if you'd have thoughts about that.
Mm-mm.
So, talk to us a little bit about why you believe that there is such a thing as a soul, aside for like, why do you not ascribe to the materialist worldview and believe that the soul is something separate from the brain, the physical manifestation of the brain?
I have a fundamental rule in life.
Okay.
Materialism is always wrong.
Okay.
I just have that assumption.
Uh-huh.
I think they don't get it.
Right.
Um, and you know, I'm gonna block the name of the friend Descartes. I'm Cartesian.
Uh-huh.
I believe we are dual substance.
Hmm.
We obviously have matter.
Hmm.
And our matter is not doomed for eternity. But we then have a soul,
Hmm.
um, that second substance, which is eternal.
Hmm.
And that's just the way I view us as a dual substance. And God gave us a soul. I don't think He would have created us without giving us that option for eternity.
Hmm. Cool. So, just also this is something that I've been thinking about a lot with respect to AI recently. So, what would you say? I mean, obviously, artificial intelligence can't have a soul. Does that have any implication into its inherent limitations to you?
Of
Is it?
course.
Yeah.
Well, I ask this:
Hmm.
would an AI bother to choose a chosen people? Would
Yeah.
AI bother to inspire messianic dreams?
Hmm.
Would AI bother to think about sending the Son of God against the greatest empire of its day and against the temple priesthood?
Hmm.
So I'm not big on AI as a challenge. There are people saying, "Oh, it's an AI universe" and so forth. Well, I don't think so.
Sure. Yeah. Gotcha. So, changing gears a little bit, I'm curious to hear a little bit more about your research into immunology and cancer. Can you talk about that a little bit? Why did you think that was the direction to go, and what's confirming that now?
Well, I lost my mother to breast cancer when I was 21.
Sorry.
Uh,
Yeah.
and at the time, I thought, well, what failed? What happened? And I was blessed at the time. I did go to some wonderful institutions. I'm not big on Harvard, frankly. Go
Mhm.
stick it. I mean, and
Okay.
Hopkins is a wonderful medical school. My
Sure.
favorites school was the National Cancer Institute.
Uh-huh.
That's the one funded by the U.S. taxpayer dollar.
Oh, okay.
And they have very few professors, very few fellows, and it's where a lot of the serious research is done.
Mhm.
And I chose to go into the laboratory. Now, actually, I drove down from Baltimore to Washington for a year every day uh,
Mhm.
to spend time with these people that thought the immune system was going to be the issue to cancer. And by the way, it has become thus, not the total answer.
Mhm.
We have two fundamental answers going on now. Number one is we can sequence the letters of DNA and
Mhm.
spot the mutations, and then try to develop drugs that block the mutation. But
Mhm.
we also have these wonderful immune therapies now. A good cancer cell has learned how to give a handshake to the T cell. I'm
Mhm.
okay. I'm here. I'm supposed to be here.
Mhm.
And so we've developed drugs that block the handshake. And
Mhm.
the minute a T cell sees the cancer cell is gone.
Mhm.
It's not an even contest.
Mhm.
And so we've been working this last year, bringing a new treatment into Memphis, where we give every T cell in the body a new eye, a new receptor to see
Mhm.
the cancer.
Interesting.
And
Okay.
we just had our first graduate yesterday, and she's free of disease.
Oh,
And
that's
so we loaded up all of her T cells. She was refractory. She was going to have no other treatment choice. And we
what kind
loaded up a lymphoma,
of okay.
white blood cell cancer.
Uh,
It's being developed for multiple myeloma lymphoma. Those are two blood cancers.
yeah.
So we loaded up all of her T cells. You have to send them off to a factory, and
Mhm.
then they insert a new eye to see
Mhm.
her cancer. And then you reinfuse those cells. Boom! It's like a lot of reaction for a few days,
Oh,
and
sure.
then there she was yesterday. I got to have my picture made with her. It was so
Yeah.
much fun
Oh,
with
wow.
her cancer gone,
Yeah.
and she's going home.
That's
So
amazing.
that's
So, sorry, just curious. So you said that there's a lot of reaction at first. So this is like they get really sick briefly. Is that
yes.
okay?
Yeah.
Of course.
You
Yeah.
just imagine. you you know, it's also being developed for autoimmune disorders. It's
Uh-huh.
going to cure things like lupus and arthritis and so forth. It's much
Oh,
easier there. Here, you're putting these T cells into this battle against sometimes a lot of cancer, and so you're going to get a lot of reaction.
right.
So you
Yeah.
have to watch them very, very closely for several weeks.
Right.
But
I would
no, they get fever, they get the flu, they get the chills. They've
imagine.
got this war going on with their T cells and their cancer. But
Yeah.
and then to watch them feel good and their cancer's gone,
Yeah.
that's pretty sweet.
That's amazing. That's so like I'm a naturopathic doctor, and in my world, we'd call that a healing crisis. The idea that now all of
Yes,
a sudden your body's attacking the thing that shouldn't be there, and then it
yes.
wins the war, and you're
Yeah.
back to your new baseline. That's
You don't
fantastic.
you don't you don't have something good for sacroiliitis, do you? Can I get a consult on
There's
this this discussion?
uh, well, what have I not asked you that you think is important that you would like to leave with our audience?
Well, I want young people to realize that science is a revelation of God.
Yeah.
If they think they're escaping God and going to something material
Mhm.
and non-religious, it's the most religious thing in the world. I
Right.
can't tell you how thrilling it was when I had the opportunity. I'm blessed because I've read science an awful lot, and I
Mhm.
could go and look at these pieces of science and how they work together, and
Mhm.
each one is a super intelligent creation.
Yeah.
And to be able to appreciate that and see that,
Mhm.
just put science in. Oh, I think I wrote a book, Sacred Science.
Yeah,
It's
good.
it's really, it is
Right.
sacred. It is.
Yeah.
These are gifts from God,
Right.
and so when the young people think they're escaping, they're beautiful, aren't they? No, you're
Sure.
not.
Yeah,
You're
absolutely.
just encountering another gift from God, another revelation of God.
Yeah, absolutely. So where can people go to learn more about you and more about your book?
Well, about me, I think I have a website. I'm not big on myself, but
Yeah.
I believe sacred.science, because science is like org and com and so forth.
Mhm.
Um, and more importantly, the book itself is on sale at
Mhm.
Amazon. I'm not a salesperson,
Mhm.
but it is purchasable.
Yeah.
So you can search Amazon books. My last name is West, and you can look for Sacred Science.
Mhm. Awesome.
And I hope people will read it.
Yeah.
It's 422 pages.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
yeah.
It's
And
chock
you've
full
read
of good
it.
stuff. I've read it and it's chock full of good stuff. Highly recommended. I'll
Thank you.
link to that in the show notes for everybody. And
Great.
thank you, Dr. West. This has been fantastic. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.